Leanne Meier, and this is Once a Nurse, the original. I want to welcome old fans and followers from along the way. And I also am really happy that there are people who are finding us all anew. So today is just a great show today. I am so grateful for all of the people who are listening. And I especially thank you for letting your colleagues, friends, and family know about this if this would be something you think they would also be interested in. As we know, the past 3 years have been very interesting, and we've been learning a lot. And part of what I've been learning is that there is so much out there for nurses. And so one of the things about this show is that I wanted it to be about who nurses, I wanted it to be about nurses' voices and getting that out, and also what we do as nurses, because so many times most people just really have no idea what it is that we do. And sometimes we don't know what each other is doing. So the most important thing for me is that this show is about imagining the future of nurses and what we can be doing. And so that's exactly what this show is about, is really imagining things that perhaps most of us are not familiar with. What I've noticed is usually when I do this show, I have a pretty good idea of what the career is of the guests that I have on and what their career has been like. But in this case, I really don't know anything about this topic, so I will be learning right along with you. So today, our topic for this episode is nurse shift from bedside to business to the boardroom. I think that's a great title because that's where we really need to be able to really make the most impact, is in the boardroom. So today our guest is Janice Nissen, and she has a BSN, she has an MBA, and she has an MA in population health, which I am really impressed with all of that. And I want to thank you, Jan, for coming on today and for being here, for sharing what you know.
Great. Thank you, Leanne. And I'm really honored to be here. I've been following your podcast for the last several months once I discovered it on LinkedIn. Okay. And I really think it's a great tribute to nurses, and honored to be here today. And
thank you.
Yeah, and what I hope to do today is really to provide an opportunity for nurses out there to understand that there is a career option for them in the life science industry. And
Exactly.
Many might be thinking, what is life science? And life science companies are biotech companies, pharmaceutical companies, device companies, diagnostic companies, health technology. It's a very big conglomerate of companies that really benefit from nurses' ability to be, critical thinkers, to be agile and flexible. And importantly, very importantly, they are the advocate for the patient. And increasingly, these industries are really focusing on the end user of their product and beneficiary of their product, which is the patient.
We have so much I'm interested in kind of gleaning from your brain and sharing with our nurses today. I first, though, always like to ask nurses when they come on, how did you become a nurse and how did you get to where you are? So many people think that everyone is just going into bedside nursing, and it's not true.
Yes. So my interest in nursing started probably like many nurses with your own health issue and crisis, if you will, which was the fact that I contracted a ruptured appendix at the age of 9. Oh. Yeah. And in those days, you stayed in the hospital in isolation for 2 weeks. I think today it'd probably be like an outpatient surgery. But it really, that experience really gave me a firsthand knowledge and an understanding of what nurses did. And they really were very comforting to me, spending 2 weeks away from my family at that time. I actually went back to that same hospital a couple of years later as a volunteer as the old candy striper role. And actually then when I went into my BSN program, I worked at the same hospital as a nurse's aide. So spent a lot of time in that hospital, and really appreciated the opportunity to see all aspects of it as I was going through my training.
What a valuable experience. So then when you actually got into nursing, where did you start?
So actually, I went into general pediatrics at a community hospital and then moved to a children's hospital where I worked a rotation between medical and surgical ICU at the pediatric hospital, which was some very seminal moments of things that I will still remember to this day in terms of how severe some of the issues were that you were dealing with. And also, as many ICU nurses know, also very, very stressful. But I wish I could say then, after a couple of years working there, that the reason I went into industry was something very noble, but it really wasn't. It really had to do with a lifestyle choice, which was I was newly married at the time, and a month of working nights, which is what was required. It was a month of days, a month of nights. I just couldn't do it. I just could not handle it with my circadian rhythms. And my hat's off to all nurses who work the night shift. And so I saw an opportunity to join a medical products company. And the first role was to serve as a nurse clinician, where I would meet patients in the hospital as they were being discharged, going home on home enteral or parenteral therapy. And I would work with them on understanding the therapy they were going home on, how to operate the pump that would deliver their therapy, their incision site, and how to monitor their progress. And it really took me all over the United States, going to these locations to work with these particular patients. So a wonderful experience and just a great way to see home care, which I think today in today's healthcare environment, we're really seeing that, there's a bigger emphasis on the home. And when you see patients in their home environment, what a different view you get of how you can best help them as well.
So from there, I want to bring up, and maybe we can move on too, but I wanted to bring up that you are both a healthcare professional, and I'd love to know that you had that foundational background that shows so much. When you have that, where all of the bits and pieces from the very starting point up to the more critical care nursing, you really have a much better idea of how much that integration of all those people is important, each person. And then I wanted to mention that you're not only a healthcare professional, but you're also a seasoned biopharmaceutical executive. That's fun to say. And that you've developed commercialization strategies at two multinational pharmacological companies, Merck and Abbott Laboratories, which is, you have had a very, very interesting career. So let's talk a little bit more. When you talk about the life science industry or life science work as a nurse, what does that look like?
Yeah, so my own career, and I'll talk about a couple of the roles that nurses can play in these life science companies. But for me personally, I did spend 30 plus years at two companies, as you mentioned, primarily in commercial roles, sales, marketing, and also operations. And in those roles, I really was able to play on my nursing knowledge and clinical knowledge of knowing different therapeutic areas, certainly knowing terminology, and knowing the importance of the patient and provider shared decision making that is so important for the right outcomes for patients. And so this took me through lots of different fields: cardiovascular, ophthalmology, oncology, vaccines. But it really was bringing me back to my nursing roots when the last role that I had at Merck was leading an organization or department called Patient Innovation and Engagement. And in that role, the small team that I was leading, we were able to bring the patient's perspective into what we called the enterprise across the entire company, into how we did our clinical trial research, what kinds of endpoints we were measuring, what could patients look at the protocol and would they enroll in this trial? Was it too burdensome? Could we make it easier for patients? How we packaged our products, how we made sure that the instructions for use were health literate, what resources would be important to patients to help them adhere to therapy. And then finally, helping to shape policy for access and reimbursement once these innovations are approved. And so it really was a wonderful experience of, again, bringing the patient perspective, which many nurses may say, well, it's always about the patient. But in the life science organization, it quite often or historically had been through the lens of the provider, that the provider, as the learned intermediary, always knew what the patient wanted. What we're finding in today's world with patients more knowledgeable, more engaged, even paying more for their healthcare, we don't always know what the patient, the physician does not always know what the patient wants and needs from a risk-benefit perspective.
Sure. And the assumption that every patient in a certain age bracket or a certain diagnosis will have the same wants or needs is completely erroneous. We know how very different, even just nurse to nurse, we have very different ideas. I'm curious, as you started that role in that kind of nurse, I want to say confidant, but that's not really the word I want. When you started your role there, bringing the patient perspective, was that an unusual thing? Were you a kind of an unusual nurse in that environment?
Well, actually, that's when I began to see that there were many nurses actually working in our company in a variety of roles. In fact, on my own team of 20 some people, I had several physicians, but I also had 3 nurses, 2 DMPs and 1 nurse practitioner. So and with the work that we were doing across the organization, I began to see nurses working in pharmacovigilance, which is the tracking of various side effects or adverse events in medications over a period of time, in medical writing, in clinical trial operations, in medical affairs, and then of course in my own department. So it really opened my eyes up to just so many roles that nurses could play in a life science company.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine that once the nurse would come into that huge organization, both of them are, expansive, that it might be easy to forget either that, those people they're working with then forget that they're nurses, or do you feel like those nurses were very clear that they were still in a nursing role and that was what they were bringing to the table?
I would say it was a little bit of both. I mean, certainly people had a role day to day that they were executing on, but it was the lens that they always put on it, which was thinking about this from a patient perspective.
Right.
And that's what was so valuable. And so having that department of patient innovation and engagement, I started to collect the names of all these nurses. And actually, we formed a network, and there were over 270 nurses just in the US alone. And I was able to engage these nurses to say, okay, in our department, what more can our company do to be more focused on the patient?
Yeah.
And they had a wealth of ideas, certainly that really helped. But they also said, we think there's more that we can provide to our company beyond just what we're doing day to day. And so that led us to do a couple things. The first thing was, we said, we have a lot of nurses here. Let's start by recognizing Nurses Week and recognizing that that's a very special event and celebrating the contributions that nurses make. And we would bring in outside speakers for this event, but we would also highlight the important work that nurses were doing around the company. So what that did is it really raised awareness within the company that, wow, we have this little network of nurses. And we started to get phone calls from different parts of the organization around, hey, can I tap into that network? For example, I'm studying a medicine that is going to be self-injected by the patient. I wonder what kind of syringe we should be exploring and use in that trial. Nurses could provide that input. We're doing some study with pediatric patients and attitudes towards clinical trials with their parents. And so what does that look like? Can we talk to pediatric nurses? Sure. What kind of packaging should we use for this particular product to make sure it would be an intuitive packaging and easy to understand the instructions for use? And then I think the more recent example that occurred was during the Omicron surge of COVID in January of 2022. Many of our company's essential workers, those on the manufacturing line, those working in the labs, they needed to be cleared to come back to work after contracting COVID. And our employee health was completely overwhelmed with the volume. And we put the word out to the nurse network. Within an hour, we had over 40 nurses that said, absolutely, I will step up and help, take the training and step in and help. And it really, once again, showed that nurses could do more than just their day-to-day job. They could contribute even more. So that was very exciting.
You have such a wealth of information. I can imagine that even knowing, you probably didn't before you found out about the 270, excuse me, other nurses. It must have been such a breath of fresh air to realize, oh, there's more people like me, and the same thing for the other nurses. So I'm thinking that I really would like to have you come back. This is kind of, I was going to say this at the end, but there's so many other branches that go off of this, about the vaccines and, so many other things. What were nurses thinking? What were they talking about? What were they bringing? So we'll find another time that we can go into more of that kind of information. I wanted to think about too, as far as, did they feel more like this was my nursing, brought them closer to a feeling of that nursing role? And do you think that brought them closer together as a group?
Yes. So it did a couple of things. First of all, the network helped to create more awareness of even other roles that nurses could do in the company. So from a career development perspective, it was very helpful from that perspective. But it also, the nurses did feel like there was more recognition of the value that they were providing to the organization. And so that was, I think, very, very powerful as well. And
I'm curious if that was a voluntary role that these nurses picked up in addition to the work they were doing, or were they acknowledged for the extra work that they were doing? So often nurses are those people who say, I could do it.
right.
And we don't even think to say, this is extra, and I would like to be reimbursed for this. And maybe that's part of why we love nurses, is because they raise their hand and they jump in and they thoroughly enjoy it. They don't think about what the monetary payback
Yeah,
is.
we were fortunate that the company did have a recognition program. So we were able to provide that, as well as our CEO at the time had definitely called out and recognized the important contribution that the nurses made to that situation the company was dealing with. Yeah.
And that is so important. Again, it's when you don't see people in your company or in your environment, it's very easy to forget again that value that they bring to it. I mean, again, you working as a nursing assistant and working as a candy striper, and all of the different ways that you moved up through the ranks and became a nurse and then worked in nursing. All of that, we begin to sense our own value to the company. But so many times what's happening right now, especially in large businesses, is that nurses are not being acknowledged for all of what they do. So this is wonderful to hear that that is happening.
Yes, and you know, one of the things that also made us realize as part of the nurse network was that nurses don't learn about life science in their training. And so, you know, we talked about wanting to go back to our alumni and from the colleges that we went to talk about educating them on the life science industry. What does drug and device development look like? How is it regulated? What are the compliance standards around it? What are the roles that you could potentially take on? And so that is why I've now begun working with an organization to develop a credentialed program for nurses who are interested in this area so that they would have the background to understand the opportunities are there. So
Exactly.
the program's in development now, so it's not ready
Yay!
yet, but it's with the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs, ACMA, and they are well recognized. They have a host of programs that they do to credential individuals going into the life science industry. And I have 4 amazing nurses who are serving as the steering committee, who are really creating this program with me to ensure that it does meet the needs of nurses and will meet the objectives that we
So
have.
when we have you back, we will have them back also, and so that
Oh,
we can have
great.
kind of a round table and get more of their perspective and interest too. One thing that, first of all, this is so typical of nurses to realize there is a need and then immediately jump in and
Yeah.
say, what can I do to fill this need? So it's one of the traits of nurses that makes me just love nurses, because it's so seldom, looking at, well, somebody needs to do this, or somehow this needs to happen or change. But really, those people can say, oh, well, I have an idea. How about you? I'm interested in what are the traits, or what kind of a nurse would be attracted to this kind of work? What are the skills? What are the things, the abilities that work best in this environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Leanne, and that's part of what I hope to build out in the program as I feature different roles. What are some of the skills that you know, but nurses are critical thinkers. You know, they're very flexible and agile, can make decisions on the spot. And they're great multitaskers. And all of those are skills that are very valuable in life science. And again, I go back to the fact that they're very empathetic, and they're advocating for the patient. And that's who the big focus of is right now of life science companies.
Well, patients and nurses really need good advocates. And what I've noticed is nurses are really good at advocating for patients, but not so good for advocating for ourselves. So again, that cohort group that you have of 270 nurses, can be the impetus to advocate for each other. And I think that's really a very important thing too. So this is really great. You've had some very, I think, unusual and interesting things that you've done in your background too. And one that struck me was, I think you had said you were on an executive committee for a nonprofit board
Mhm.
in Nicaragua for Clinica Verity, I think. Was that the name of the clinic? Tell
Yes.
us about that, how you got involved in that, and how did that impact what you were doing, what you were thinking about your career?
Yes. Oh, no, thank you. It was a wonderful experience. Unfortunately, it has just come to a close. So I'll tell you why. But it was a referral from a friend who was on the board. And the clinic was one that was meeting a lot of needs of a rural population, a very poor, underserved population in Nicaragua. But when you visited that clinic, you thought you would be in a clinic that was in the best part of the United States um,
Really?
clinic. Very clean, very welcoming, very authentic in terms of um, talking with patients, making them feel comfortable, and really meeting their needs. And they did just terrific work. And so a lot of our role on the board was to help create sustainability so the clinic could continue to operate. And so helping them with grants that would help with the sustainability, because this was a very poor population. Unfortunately, Nicaragua is going through a lot of unrest. They're run by a dictator, and he unfortunately shut down all of the NGOs in Nicaragua.
And say what an NGO for people who don't know.
Right, yes, a non-governmental office, and typically nonprofit organizations, and Clinica Verde was one of those. It was really such a shame to see that happen, because the staff was extremely passionate about the job that they were doing, and the opportunities that they provided to that rural population. It's just really a shame. So unfortunately, we had to shut it down after we were closed out by the government, and right now trying to write up the learnings for other NGOs that might be in a similar situation. And so just last week I was reviewing the paper that has been written, and I was just struck by, wow, how much had been accomplished with that particular clinic. Yeah.
And again, and sometimes in those smaller environments, you can do more because you can see what's being done, not only by yourself, but by the people immediately around you. And you see the immediate, feedback from those people who are receiving help they've never received before. So would there be any possibility of opening something like that in another country that perhaps is not quite so dictated to?
Yes, exactly. And that's the idea of writing up the learnings so that it can be shared. But you're exactly right. I think there's a lot of learnings that could be shared. And to your point around the kind of outcomes that we saw, because the sustainability was through grants where they are asking, what is the impact that you have had on the population? They had amazing outcomes in terms of prevention of teenage pregnancies, infant health, and a host of other ways that they were actually meeting the needs of that rural population.
Right. I'm interested in the grants as being the major foundation for these things to be able to happen. If there are nurses out there that maybe they're at the bedside now and they've been thinking, maybe even have dreams or have plans of things that they would like to do that are along this line, either in rural United States or perhaps in neighboring states, Mexico, Canada, or other areas of the world altogether. What oftentimes they have no idea about this whole idea of grants and support and angel networks and all those things. Is there, could they speak with you to find out maybe how or what direction maybe to go, or what might be valuable for them to be prepared for, to go to somebody and ask for help?
I don't claim to be an expert about that, but I would be happy to speak with anyone that is interested in volunteering, as a board member on a nonprofit. I think that they would absolutely love to have the insights from the nursing community,
especially if they're newly removed from their nursing role, where they really do have some of the most up-to-date, and especially with the pandemic, there's so many things that the nurses learned along the way, and maybe even taught a lot of their comrades, the doctors and some of the other people. What they were learning as they were standing beside these beds for 3 years, ongoing. I had another thought with that and it went right away. Was there anything else you wanted to add with that? I know what I wanted. I wanted to ask you to give us your email address. I think, or if you prefer, I think you had mentioned the LinkedIn was a good way to get a hold of you.
Yes. Yeah. I think LinkedIn is a great way. I check that quite often. That's actually, Leanne, how I found you.
Yes.
It was on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so amazed. And lately, it seems like there's been, it's almost like a door opened and suddenly a ton of people are discovering that I'm here and I'm I'm passionate about a lot of people's things that they're interested in. And so lately, I've just been getting a lot of people contacting me and wanting to talk with me. And again, I'm not an expert on many areas, but what I am getting to be an expert at is connecting people to other people who are experts in those areas. And that's been very fulfilling to me. I just, there's many things that happen to us when we leave our career or leave what we thought was going to be our career for the rest of our life. And suddenly it's like, how do I reinvent myself? So I think there were some other things that you talked about. You started to talk about the educational curriculum. And I know that you're working on that right now. Where will that curriculum be housed? How would they get a hold of it?
Yes, so it will be on the site of the ACMA, the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs. But I will be doing a fair amount of outreach to colleges of nursing with advanced degree programs.
Okay.
I'm thinking about nurse practitioners or those
Yes.
with the DMP that may be looking for a next step opportunity. But also other organizations and nursing societies I'll be reaching out to as well. And then, of course, attending the Power Up Conference, which I'm
Yes.
looking forward to.
Exactly. I am really excited. I'll be able to meet you and we can have some great conversations. I have a feeling that, in fact, I know because already the people who have signed up and the people who are coming to speak and the people who have passion about being sponsors, there's already a lot of excitement that is being generated. So, so the Power Up Nursing Conference is going to be in Orlando, June 22nd through the 24th. And the whole idea there is that we really want to get at people's dreams. What was your dream maybe before a pandemic hit? Do you still have that dream? Is it still back there somewhere? Maybe you feel like you always thought you'd be at the bedside and maybe couldn't see yourself in any other place. So would you like to have some ideas sort of like this, where you're coming and talking about what else is possible to inspire people, to give them new ideas about something that maybe they never would have even considered, to be able to go on as the next step of their career going forward. I think there's always a feeling, this is what I should speak for myself. When I was in the position of being in nursing for many, many years, like 30 years, I was at the point of feeling like I need to do something different. This is becoming too routine. I just need to really stimulate myself again. And so that's what I kept thinking is, but what else can I do? And actually it was an injury that took me out. So it wasn't even a decision on my part. Oh, here's what I can do. So the injury took me out. And then I had to figure out, okay, I'm my self-support. So where am I going to go from here? And I was amazed at all the ideas and things that came up and actually worked out for me to try and do, while I was thinking this might not be the final place, but it gives, it connects me to more people and more people and more people. So what are you especially excited about the Power Up Conference?
That it seems to be a conference that's not at all focused on anything clinically related necessarily,
Yes.
but more of a focus on nurses' mental health and empowerment and leadership, and I think career development. And it just seems to be a very big opportunity for networking as well. And well timed, I think, after the pandemic when a lot of in-person meetings hadn't taken place for a couple of years. As we're
Knock on wood.
right.
The way things are going, we will just have to hope on that one. Especially what I'm excited about it is that there will be people there. So like if you are interested, how do I create a resume that will take me to the next level? There'll be people there who can help walk you through that and help you to, know what is going to be most interesting, especially if you know the area you want to go to. They can really be of help to you in that. And then again, just talking to so many different people over that period of time, I have a feeling we're going to have some really vivacious conversations about ideas, about maybe brand new things in nursing that have never even been thought of before, how we might be able to move those forward. I hope to be part of one of them, which is Nurses Transforming Healthcare. And I truly believe that nurses are in an incredible position right now to be able to lead the transformation of healthcare, especially at that baseline, that foundational level of primary care, wellness, disease prevention. I think that's where nurses are going to be profoundly invaluable. So much to talk about. I think we're going to call this the end here. So is there anything else you want to share that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure that nurses hear?
Yes, no, I really appreciate this opportunity, and I am looking forward to the conference. But I also want to say, as it's listed on the screen here, that I am happy to speak to anybody that's interested or wants to learn more about careers in life science, because I really am passionate around the opportunities that are available to nurses, and that maybe allow them to do a career pivot at
Thank you.
this point in time. Thank you.
I want to add too, and maybe it's been on the screen and I missed it, but my email is Leanne, Leanne, at onceanurse.com. And I am also very happy to talk to people. Sometimes we have to schedule a little bit further out based on, what's going on for us. But I want to thank you, Jan. This has been so helpful to me, and I hope to other people too. It's a whole new light that has been shed on nursing.
That's
So
right.
I will see you in June.
That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.